I'm Jyothi Robertson, and I'm going to be hosting alongside Jasmine Johnson, who works with me, and she will be speaking as well as me while we present on productivity today. Let me go ahead and I'm going to start my slides because my first couple slides are introductory slides. So welcome, as I said, to the fourth of our deep dive sessions. We began our deep dive September 6th, and we focused in on creating space and really noticing space. That was a fun one because we redefined how we view space in our lives and what it means to notice how it shows up when we make room for that. Then October 4th, we focused in on different contemplative practices where we actually tried 5 different practices, shortened, abridged practices that were meditations that I guided us through. And then we looked at some of the science and research behind different types of meditation. Last month, we talked about values and how values align with our mission and goals. And what we do when maybe our values aren't aligning with those of our organizations and how we can navigate that and think about values newly. Next month is our last in the series of sessions, and it's going to be focusing primarily on communication and action. So how do we communicate within our teams as individuals? How do we make requests? How do we receive those? And what it looks like to both learn and unlearn our communication styles. Then we're also going to just be wrapping up the entire series that we've been doing January 3rd. So that's a pretty heavy lift for 1 hour or 50 minutes as we keep it, but it should prove to be valuable. And I do invite all of you to come to that as well. Today, we're going to be talking about productivity. And productivity is, I've been talking about this in all the other deep dive sessions. It's probably one of my funnest topics. And that's because since 2005, I've been working as a shelter medicine veterinarian trying to increase productivity. Or at least that's the way I put it. So that's why I use quotations around my head. And that's a part of what my organization at JVR Shelter Strategies often gets called in to do. Increase efficiency, improve efficiency, and think about how we're showing up to be more productive. And so that's a really interesting concept to think about, this idea of producing more, perhaps being more, doing more, and what that reflects in our lives and how it shows up can show up in many different ways. But first, let's begin with a story. So my first story of the day, and for those of you who have heard me before, you know I like stories. So my first story of the day is going to be about consulting. And this happened to be in December of a few years back. And by the way, in advance, some of the photos that I'm showing are from shelters. The story itself is a story. It's supposed to be a generalization. It is not accurate to a particular shelter. So if you recognize your desk, I am not speaking necessarily about you in this story. So it happened to be December. So I'm going to place this in winter time. And it's December a few years back. And I was invited in with my team, with Jasmine, who's on this phone call as well, and a few others to visit a shelter to increase productivity and efficiency in their veterinary team specifically. Although when we went there, they said, okay, we want you to look at all our efficiencies and productivity and help us improve that. So I showed up on the first day at noon because I had driven there from somewhere else, and it was noon by the time I got there. And I walked into a room that looks very much like this room. Can you all see my pointer? Yep, I see Jose with his thumbs up. Thank you, Jose. And so this is the room that I entered, and imagine seated at these chairs were a whole bunch of vets and techs all seated in these chairs. And I walked up to them, and they were all viewing their computer screens. Right? And I said, hello, how's it going? I'm Dr. Robertson. I'm here to help you with efficiencies, and I'd love to hear about what it is you're doing. They said, oh, well, we've been going through our records and working through all of the emails from the night before. I said, okay, well, what does that look like? Well, it means that we place these stickies and we create an inbox, and then we get the folders and the file folders that we've had, and we bring those in and we try to get them into our day and get ready for our day. I say, oh, okay, so you have this stack right here that I see in this inbox. Is that what we're referring to? And they said, no, actually, there's this stack over here. And let me tell you, the stack was almost the size of me. And they said, that's the stack that we're going through right now. And we're reading through it. We're scanning each of the medical records and we're putting it into the computer. And then we're putting it into PetPoint. And then we're going to go through and review the record and make sure that everything jives and that we understand what we're doing. Then we're going to go out and do our medical rounds. I said, okay, that makes sense. Let me just go on and observe. And so the day continued, and these same people went through and they got a chance to see animals in the afternoon. They were seeing foster appointments with kittens, and then they were doing surgeries, and there were some dentals that were happening as well. And all along, there were different emails that were showing up. And so they were going back to their computer, and there was a cycle that was happening. And the cycle looked exactly like this, where they were first with the animals and going to surgery. They were trying to get all their surgeries done. And they were doing surgeries a little bit late because it was community cats that they happened to be doing that day. So that's why they hadn't started surgeries until afternoon. And they knew those kittens would actually be staying the night. So they had left it for the afternoon along with some dentals. And so this is what their day looked like. And I asked them at the end of the day, and it was about 10 p.m. Actually, it was pretty late. I said, did you feel like this was a productive day? And, the veterinarians, there was a group of 4 of them. They turned to me and they said, yes and no. Let me define it for you. And so I turned to them and I said, okay, answer this question. If you're being productive, if I am being productive, I am, and go ahead and please fill in that blank for me. Tell me what it is that you're feeling. Again, I'm just going to type this in since it's fun to type in what they said. And so one of them said, if I'm being productive, I've, I've finished everything. Everything I've wanted to finish. Okay, that means I'm productive. Another person said, if I'm being productive, I'm busy. Occupied. I'm not sitting around. Did I spell occupied right? I'm not sure. Apologize if I spelled it wrong. Okay. The third thing is the third person who was in the group said, I'm feeling good about myself. That's what tells me that I'm productive. And then the last person said, I'm ready to end my day. I said, okay, that makes sense. I understand all that. And so I put the same question into an AI bot. And I said, okay, if I am being productive, I am what? And if I am being busy, I am being what? Because I wanted to understand, well, what is this definition of producing? And how do people view productivity? So for the person who said, I'm finished with everything I've wanted to finish, there's a sense of accomplishment. There's a sense of being that underlies that, right? It's not just the tasks are clicked off. It's this sense of wanting. For the person who says, I'm busy and occupied, well, that person is really very task motivated, right? So they want to be able to check off all the boxes, and there's nothing wrong with that. They don't want to be sitting idle. So again, there's a sense of idleness. There's a sense of either doing and being as being part of being productive. The third person who said, I'm feeling good about myself, that was someone that really was feeling like we need to be taking care of our quality of being as well. So prioritizing self-care, efficiently managing, pursuing some of the personal goals was really coming to his attention as being at the center of that. And then this person who said, I'm ready to end my day. And I remember this really stuck with me. It's because it points to completion. What does completion look like for an individual at any given moment? And so this is a way of viewing productivity. Now, I actually don't love the AI's answer. This idea of working smarter, of quality versus quantity, doesn't actually necessarily sit with me. And you'll see why, because I want to reframe what it means to be productive. Focusing on outcomes as well may not really serve us for being whole in how we view ourselves. So let me continue by viewing productivity as a state of being, as a state of being, of who we are being in any moment. And here I use a tree as a metaphor, and I'm going to use this throughout this talk because a tree allows us to view growth, balance, grounding, sustainability, having that life, that roots that draw into us. It gives us a sense of a healthy view of the word productivity. We're viewing productivity from the idea of producing, where producing is creation of space such that we are rooted, balanced, and able to grow within that. In the module, for those of you who did the module, and this particular module on productivity, you saw that we talked a lot about habits, how to create habits in order to increase productivity. We talked about the cue reward routine, how to create a new habit, how the way that habit formation occurs to simplify our lives. I'm now going to ask you to let go of that. I'm going to ask you to let go of what I talked about in that module itself and think about it newly, that we are all people of habits, right? That we are learning beings. And as learning beings, we created habits a long time ago. And that it's a process of unlearning and letting go of the habits that we've created that leads to balancing. We can balance habit formation. So today we're going to be taking you through some different tools, some actual apps that I use and things like that, that may help you, or they may not. You can view it within the context of the habits you already have and those that you want to newly create, right? Because it's a balancing of those that becomes really important. So as a reflection, what steps can you take to consciously unlearn the habituated patterns in order to create space for adopting healthier, more effective practices? I'm going to ask you to reflect on this month until the next deep dive and think about it. What are those habits that you already have that might not be serving you? And then go back to the module and take a look at how we create new habits. Okay, let me continue with my story. So as part of our process in the shelter, we do time studies and we look at efficiencies. So we were in that specific lobby in that office area that you saw. And 1 o'clock came around and we walked into the surgical suite because they were going to begin these surgeries, and they created the space to be able to recover animals as well, the beach area. And they were getting ready for surgeries. And it was our process to actually look at time studies. And so let me take you through that a little bit. What our team often does is we go in and we do actual time studies of procedures where we will look at your pre-op time, start time, end time, surgery start times, end times, post-op start time, end time, the total post time, total non-surgical time. So while this table I've shifted a little bit, it is a table that we use in my team often to notice space for efficiency. And what we do after doing these time studies is we actually time and look at what it took as, and I'm going to put again in quotes, productive and unproductive time. Well, in the surgical suite, we can shave off time. So when a surgeon is waiting a total of 2 hours and 16 minutes for animals to show up on the surgical time, well, each of those becomes a surgery. I know there's other doctors in the room here, like Dr. Strong, who are well aware of what 2 hours and 16 minutes can actually mean, right? If a surgery can take 5 minutes, then that's quite a lot of surgeries. So productivity in the sense of within the surgical space can mean productivity of actual shaving off minutes of time, changing the way we think about our instrumentation, of when we do pre-op exams, of how we bring animals into surgery, how we intubate. All of that impacts our time. This is in the sheltering space, but it can also be reflected in our personal space. Notice where we spend our time. So I use an app called A Tracker, and I made up this particular week for the purposes of this screenshot, but I use it all the time. And I like this app. There's many different apps, by the way. But this is one that I like. And the reason I like this particular app is because it allows you to do more than one thing at the same time, which I understand that multitasking is not something that we can do. But for me, the journey you own, which is here as JYO, Joe, includes my meditation time. So I might be doing a task of the journey you own, which includes doing yoga and meditation. So I might want to reflect both of them. And then at the end of the week and the end of the month, you can take a look and see where your time is spent. It creates reports and so on. And by the way, I'm going to be sharing a bunch of tools like this. I will just put in the disclaimer, I think it's called, that I don't receive money from any of these. These just happen to be ones that I use. There are plenty of others that are out there. These are ones that I found to be really interesting and that help me a lot. So while we're doing time studies in the shelter, we can also notice how we spend our own time. And notice that viewing productivity as a construct of time is actually one that can become problematic because there's more to productivity than time. It's also space. And so if we view time and space as being equated, then space opens up possibility for creativity. So if we're seeing that we're spending a lot of our time maybe viewing and managing emails, then it may behoove us to create a system around email sorting that can create space for more productivity, which is then creation of new ideas. Okay, let me go back to my story now. As I was mentioning, it's the end of the day now. Okay, it's about 10 p.m. and I was sitting with those veterinarians and asking them about productivity. And they pointed to their computer screen and they said, look, I still have 70 emails, 70 new emails that showed up throughout the day. And they're coming to through all these different avenues. But these are all new work emails that have showed up. And this is how we sort our day. And so this became a major issue for this team. And I'd like to invite Jasmine to go ahead and come into this story at this time and take over my screen and show us all what you chose to do for this particular team.
All right. Okay. So for this particular organization, one of the biggest sources of emails that they had was from their pathway rounds. There was a person that oversaw pathway rounds that would send an enormous email with all of the animals that needed items to be completed to all of the departments in the organization. That email would then get replied to by all of these organizations. And so it was overloading and overwhelming all of the departments. And then they were trying to figure out which animals they actually needed to look at and which items were theirs. So we used an Airtable to help them sort of filter and sort things and make things more efficient. I picked Airtable just because it's a free resource, and it is pretty easy to use on both a computer and a phone. So it felt like a good option, but there are plenty of other options out there like monday.com as well. So with this Airtable, the same person that created the email puts all of the information in this Airtable instead of the email. This then sorts for each individual team. So instead of looking at just the main table, they can look at just their particular team and see only the items that they need to do instead of being overwhelmed by seeing 100 animals, let's say. It will list all of the information needed, and then there's automations that can be added to help make things even more efficient so that they don't have to do much else besides look at what they are supposed to do and then do those things. Once they finish doing them, the automations that are currently in here alert the person who originally put all the items in so that way they know when an animal can move to the next stage and when that team is done without that team having to send another email back and clogging up emails again. This Airtable has tons of different automations that can be used, and it's pretty customizable, pretty easy to use. And so for this team, they wanted email, but it can send an alert through Slack or whatever communication tool the organization is using. So that is something that we created for this particular place.
Yeah. And what was exciting about this is that as you see, there's a way at the right side, there was ways to notify each other if the records were updated, if an issue was addressed, and each team, again, could have their own ability to prioritize, put notes in, create attachments. And the reason we bring this up is because email is one area that many shelters that we communicate with struggle with. Email does not prioritize well. It doesn't prioritize well at all. The first thing on your inbox is the thing that you're going to go to. So creating a system around prioritization that involves communication is one that can increase productivity, improve efficiency, and save time, and thereby create space. And so that's why we bring this up. Again, just as an example of what can be done and what Jasmine did for one of our teams. I'm going to go ahead and bring us back into where we were. And let's continue looking at some of our other examples and some of the other systems that can support us. This is one way that I think about systems. There are systems that impact our health, the ways we communicate, project management, collaboration. Collaboration is very similar to communication, but you'll see why we split that. Emotional, spiritual well-being, social interactions, managing distractions, and so on. A lot of these are interrelated. They're just terms that I placed out here to get you thinking in different areas. For each of these, we can create systems around them to support ourselves. So for example, for health, thinking about sleep, the way we think of physical exercise and nutrition, and I'll share some specific apps that I utilize there. For communication, one thing that's definitely helpful is considering shortening meetings if you have the privilege and ability to do so. You know, when you think about the way that TED Talks have become so impactful, a part of the reason that they have that impact is because they don't last for an hour, because they've noticed that studies have shown that 23 minutes is about what your brain can handle, and even less than that, about 19 minutes. So if you're planning to communicate with people, what does it look like to shorten meetings? And we've talked about this in other modules and in other sessions, that creating that 10-minute pause or gap between meetings can be very helpful as well. You know, rethinking email the way that we just presenting it, and reframing requests, which is what we'll be talking about in our next deep dive, are very useful ways to bridge communication gaps. One of the biggest other concerns that shows up in our consults is lack of communication and a lack of transparency. So the tools to increase productivity involve those tools to improve communication. We have a person who's with us right here, Jose, who's a communication and culture expert who spends his time really thinking about this area. So I'm going to leave that for him to expand on in some of his hatching collaborative workshops. And then there's project management, thinking about the big picture view. What does it look like to create leverage tasks? What does it mean to simplify the way we file share, we collaborate? And then how do we center ourselves? How do we think about those social well-being, ability to spend time with our human and non-human family? There's a lot of writing on this slide, by the way, a lot more writing than I typically put. And I'm putting it here because it's also going to be shared with you as a PDF. So creating these systems, when you create that system, the purpose is to simplify your life. And when you simplify it, it amplifies it. I really like this drop metaphor, the way that the waves get amplified. A single drop can now be sort of reflected and resonates even further. So keep this, I call this a power phrase, simplify to amplify. It's stuck on my wall right here in front of me. I wrote it there so I can remember it. That when I'm getting overly complicated and making things difficult, I go back to this idea of simplifying to amplify, whether it's in the tasks or the tools. So let's look at some of these practical systems. One of them is with email. Jasmine already presented to us a way that we can think about email as, recreating it as a management system via Airtable, Monday.com, or some of the other systems. But we still have to manage emails, right? We can't really get rid of email. It's still coming at us. So what can we do? Well, we can utilize different add-ons. And this is a screenshot of my email. What I've done is I put Asana in there as an add-on. I use Gmail. Other people might use Microsoft. They might use other forms of email like Apple Mail and so on. But often you can get add-ons for many of them. So I put the add-on of Asana, Dropbox, and Zoom. I have an add-on at the top of my screen, actually, which isn't showing up here. That's for Calendly. So that means when I'm in email, I can go ahead and integrate right within the message that I'm composing, my Zoom, my calendar, my Dropbox files, my Asana, and my Calendly links. Now, the reason that's important for me is the same reason why in my time studies of surgery, it's important that I have my surgical tools, all of them that I need, and I'm not sticking my spay hook through everything because that takes me an extra 30 seconds to pull the spay hook out. It shaves seconds off my time if I have everything within this email. And if time equates to space, through productivity, then I want to minimize the time spent going back and forth between apps, going back and forth between my calendar and going back and forth between other things. So this is just an example of what I utilize for emails. Now, there are other systems that can support us. Health and wellness is an area that I think is probably one of the most important areas, and that's the focus of the journey you own. Are we creating space for that? So two apps that I use are Insight Timer and Calm. Again, Insight Timer, I'm just a volunteer contributor, so anybody can be a contributor. And I contribute by placing the meditations that I create there. There's thousands of meditations there, and you can use it for free and just listen to meditations. There's programs for sleep as well, and it can be really helpful. There's also Noom and a few others. Yeah, I'll show you Noom in a minute, that also have meditation apps. Again, very helpful for being well-rounded and for being able to set reminders, notifications to meditate and so on. And think about this question that I placed at the bottom. Are we creating space for our mental and emotional well-being? Are we creating space for our mental and emotional well-being? Are we really placing time and energy and focus towards that? And how are we doing that? Along these same lines, there's a few actual tools that I use and then a few other things. So I'm going to show you one that's actually on my hand right now. This is called Whoop. I'd never heard of it before. I used the Fitbit for a long time, but I really love this. And you know what? I'm noticing right here that it shows up very small right here, but it's a pretty cool gadget. What it does is it measures our sleep, our heart rate. It looks at heart rate variability, respiratory rate. And what I like about it is it doesn't measure your strain or how you're feeling based solely on your activity. So Fitbit is another one that I've used where it's based on steps, but Whoop will actually look at how my heart rate increases in any activity and then views strain and how much sleep I should be getting based on all the activities in my day. So that means if I'm nervous right now presenting to all of you, my heart rate might be increasing. And I might be actually putting out more energy in a way that impacts my ability to recover from that because it's looking at my heart rate variability, the ability of recovery of my heart rate. And so right now, if I'm more tense, if I'm nervous, if I'm showing up in this space in a way that my heart rate's increasing, it's going to know that and change my strain score and tell me to sleep earlier, which I think is pretty cool. And again, I don't get money from them. I kind of wish I did because I love talking about it. I didn't learn about it until I was in Italy and some other random person had that. And I asked what that crazy thing was on their arm. And that's how I found out about it. But I do know a couple other people in our animal welfare space have said, oh, I use that too. So it's kind of fun, and so you can look into it. It does cost money. So it is not a free thing because you have to buy this thing, but they do a good job with updates. And then the other one that I've used that some of you might have is the Aura ring. For those of you who don't like something on your wrist, it's a ring that goes on your finger and it has a really neat sleep app component where it measures your sleep. And it does a bunch of other things. So when you're meditating, I think it now might have some other features related to meditation as well. And it's nice because it's a ring that you just wear. The battery lasts for a really long time. What's really cool about Whoop, actually, okay, I'm just going to show you, is that you never actually take it off to charge it. You charge it by taking the charger and sticking it on you. So you could probably keep this on your arm forever and never like take it off, which is probably what they're going for as a company. But so that's another thing. Noom is a subscription-based app that I was told by many other shelter folks works really well. I think it's meant for both diet and for not. I've tried it. I've liked it. I haven't stuck with it. So I'm probably not the best person for it. And then Huberman Lab podcast is probably one of my favorite podcasts that's out there. He's a neurophysiologist and a professor at Stanford. He presents science and science-based tools for life. He is not my favorite podcaster when it comes to meditation, for calming, for centering and grounding. He is my favorite professor when it comes to understanding like how sleep impacts you and what you can do for sleep and diet and different vitamins and sleep and like how vitamins impact sleep and productivity. He has a whole exercise and a whole bunch of things. He has a whole exercise lab. And I've actually visited uh, Stanford and them. And so it's a pretty interesting podcast. So the question I ask when I think about all of these tools is what is fueling us? What is fueling us? What is giving us energy? What are we putting into our bodies? What what nourishment are we putting into our bodies? What are we watching? What are we eating? How are we sleeping? What conversations are we having? Who are we associating with? How is that fueling us? What's draining us and what's fueling us? Okay, so again, these are trying to combine some of what we've learned in the other modules with this. And then reflecting and completing our day is another system that, again, I've spoken about before. The day one journal is the journal that I've talked about. There are many, many journals. I just happen to like this one because it's really, really easy. You can use it off of your watch. You can do voice recordings, video recordings. You can add photos. You can do a whole bunch of stuff. So I've been using it for a very long time, but it's, again, so many ways to do this. And here, the question that I ask is, are we finding time for reflection and completing our day? Notice that when, if we take us back to that story about feeling and being productive as a feeling, we can be productive through the completion of our day. Through reflecting on our day, we can actually feel productive because now we've looked at all that we've done, who we were being in that space, and then we put things reliably into existence. So even though we didn't finish the 70 emails, we know in our minds that we are complete about them because we have now closed out the day with them. We said, okay, we're done. I can be complete about this. I'm going to go to sleep now. I know it's going to be there and I'm going to move on and I will be there for tomorrow. And I'll approach it in that way. So reflection, I believe, is part of the key to creating that completion, which creates our ability to let go of our day, which then opens up room for us to see the productivity that we had, which then reflects on our time and the space that we've had, which then opens up space for newly creating. Okay, so that's a whole cycle in itself. Looking at task management systems, Jasmine mentioned Monday.com. Monday.com allows you to do a lot of things, and I know a lot of shelters are using it right now. So at least 4 of the shelters that I work with use it. So that is a tool where you can create these tables. You can come up with different ways to organize yourself and your tasks. I've used Asana in the past. I know that a few of the universities continue to use it. Remember, these tools are as good as the ability to use it. And so if it doesn't sync well with your other systems, it may not be the tool for you. The tool I use is right here. They're like little sticky notes. I love sticky notes. I love writing on sticky notes. And what I'll do is I have a task management system. What I'll often do is actually put my tasks and I'll block off times on a physical calendar because I like the physical tactile touch. And then I will, when I'm done with one of these, I'll crumple it up and I'll stick it in my jar. And then at the end of the day, I get to see a whole bunch of crumpled up sticky notes. And for some reason, that makes me feel really good about myself, and so it's a very physical way of doing it. I think Asana has this magical like unicorn that crosses your screen when you've completed something. But for those of you who are tactile like me, nothing compares to like the ripping up of a task that you have now finished in a work block and that you can then see and you see it build up over time. So for communication, there's many different ways to communicate. Slack is just one. Microsoft Teams is one. I am going to save this. The concept of communication is so much more than the tools. So I'm going to really save this for next time, for January 3rd, because I truly do believe that there is a way of communicating and forming our requests that allows us to communicate better, regardless of what communication system we choose, whether it's messages. I will say that using text string is very similar to using email, right? It's not going to prioritize the way that you're communicating. You can prioritize, though, in Slack. You can prioritize, I believe, in Teams. I don't use Microsoft, but I believe you can do that. So where you can create different channels, which then will allow you to prioritize where you're going to. And that's what's important to recognize, again, with things like, your standard text, where you're going back and forth and back and forth, and then are needing to scroll up to see what somebody said or where that link was placed. Okay. The next component is continuous learning. Learning allows for an openness of productivity because you're getting new tools. You're learning in new ways. So that's where Maddie's University and other opportunities to learn and see show up. And so I bring this up for anyone who is interested in doing the module, because I know that there's folks who are only doing the deep dive sessions, but any of the module, all of the things at Maddie's University are free to anyone, and you can get credit for it. And so this is an opportunity for opening up for newness and for increasing those views. What's really important, though, at the end of it all is that there's a lot of tools, but what works is what you're actually willing to use, right? What works is what you're willing to use. There's so many things out there, and it doesn't help to get that latest gadget or gizmo if you're not going to use it. And I know I've learned that best with my physical fitness things, where I've gotten memberships at various gyms and then I don't show up. And so I've realized that the best thing I use, oh, I didn't put it here. It's called a smart rope. It's a jump rope which jumps, and it tells you the number of jumps that you've done. And I can do it anywhere. And since I travel so much for consults, it's really helpful to have something I can take with me. And I can't take my gym with me. And that became like the new realization that I had, is that if I had something simple that could still encourage me to do something and that was really physically fit. So for me, if I can jump rope in 10 minutes, it's the same as me walking for 30 minutes. So I can do it really fast and then be done. And so that was the other thing that helped me. So let me make sure I can actually see my screen while I'm saying this next part. So this is the metaphor that I used in the beginning and that I like to return to, that if we think about productivity as a state of being and view it within this context of, growth, healthy lifestyle choices, flexibility, contemplative practices, prioritization, continuous learning. So those things that I just showed you, but viewing it from the root structure, right? Flexibility is pruning, stability as grounding, prioritizing what we're doing based on sustainability, and then learning as just being learning beings, growing as a tree might grow. We can then be ready to embody productivity in a way that prioritizes well-being, because we are embodying growth, balance, rootedness, and sustainability. Right? So we're reframing productivity and prioritizing our well-being within this embodiment of something more. The tools are just there externally. And then what it allows us to do is open up space. Right? That's what those time studies, for example, showed us, with 2 hours and 15 minutes of idle time. Well, time here opens up for space, and space then, however, gets filled up. And so this is what I really want to leave us with, this idea of when you have space, what is it that you can count on to fill the space? And each of us will have our own answer for that. But when we have these tools that improve our productivity, and then we create space, what is it that's going to come into that space? And how can we then view that space? So that takes us back to deep dive number 1 and deep dive number 2 that really centered on space. So what can we count on to fill the space? So your next steps on your journey is to reflect on what steps you can take to consciously unlearn. And I use the word consciously unlearn because you'll have to really dive deeply into what your habits are. What are those habituated patterns? And some of them will serve you and some of them will not serve you. It can be like uh, choosing to do a particular task in a particular way over and over again, just because it's what you've done. And yet that task might not be the best way. It might not be the best way of doing it, the fastest way, the most efficient. So create space then for adopting healthier, more effective practices. And then notice your space and what fills it. And then January 3rd, we'll have the last of these sessions on communication in action. How do we utilize language to create possibility? How does our listening impact our view? And then we'll really talk about some specific ways of communicating, like how we communicate with our teams, what that looks like as well. I believe there is one more last slide. Yes, there is. So I'd like to thank all of you for coming today. And hopefully this has been helpful for all of you. I know it is recorded and I have seen that many people have joined in the recordings as well. Thank you, everybody. I'd like to give you all back your 10 minutes before your next appointment. So I'm going to go ahead and leave and I'm going to let you all leave as well. Thank you all. Bye-bye.